My name is Justin Ennis, and this is the annual Ennis Museum at Oliver Middle. Welcome, my name is Justin Ennis, and this is the annual Ennis Museum at Oliver Middle School. This year's theme was a collection of various subjects that we have covered in class, ranging from Mesopotamia, the Romans, the Greeks, a little bit of Renaissance, some Aztecs, just kind of a hodgepodge of a lot of things. What we're also doing, we're inviting the social studies classes here at Oliver, as well as the students from Wolf Creek will be coming over today. The purpose of this is a little bit more of a hands-on activity to let them dress up, to make an artifact. And it's one of these events that if you ask any kid that's been a former student of mine that's participated in this, and they'll put a smile on their face. It's something that they have to do on their own outside of class. So it has a little bit more personal ownership and something that they do on their own.
I did my project on women of ancient Rome. And women of ancient Rome didn't have as many rights as they had more rights than the women in Greece, but they have a lot less rights than we have today. They had no choice in marriage, and they had no choice in having children, and they couldn't participate in plays or anything. They could face the death penalty if they drank wine. And here I have a mortar and pestle. And women, they would put spices in it and grind it up and stick it in their food. And this is a loom. And people are making a weaving like this. And they would weave cloth for clothes for their families to wear. And they had to take care of their families. They had to teach their children, and they had to run their household, make clothes, and feed their family.
Oh, I read that too. This is my project on ancient Greek drama. Girls weren't allowed to perform in the plays because women's rights had not been established yet. The actors were judged by a small panel of judges, and if they did well, they could win prize money, but they weren't paid to act. The two types of plays were comedy and tragedy. Comedies were about average or below average people who good things happened to them. Tragedies were about kings, heroes, or gods, and bad things happened to them. Only rich people went to the theaters because it was expensive to get into, and very few women went, but there were a couple.
Well, I did my project on Greek architecture, and we named it after the Greek word for architecture. And I learned that they used 3 different types of column to build their buildings. The Doric column is the most simple. Then there's the Ionic, which uses swirls, and the Corinthian, which is the most elaborate, and they didn't use the Corinthian columns as much because it was so difficult to build. And I learned about lots of different kinds of Greek buildings, and I also learned a lot more about the Parthenon, which is one of the most famous Greek buildings. The Acropolis is also very famous, and they had lots of different theaters. I really like old buildings and stuff, like Roman buildings and Greek buildings, and so it was either going to be Roman buildings or Greek, and I decided to do Greek because I really like Greece. I just like how it's like really old and authentic. I want to be a vet when I grow up, but I think architecture would be a really fun career. Pretty interesting.
I did a video because I got a new video camera for Christmas, and I did the 12 Olympian gods because we learned about them earlier in the school year, and Zeus is the king of all the gods, and Hera is his wife and sister, and then he has 2 other brothers. Poseidon, he rules the sea, and then Hades rules the underworld. And it's just about their life and everything and how they live.
Well, I chose the pyramids because I thought it was going to be really nice, and it's something I don't really know about, but it was made a long time ago. It helped me a lot since I can't go there. And I think I learned a lot. Well, my pyramid over there, I built myself. I built all the wood. I cut them all out. I hinged them all together, and I put sandpaper on them on the sides.
My project is Olympia, and I did the most important places that they have the games. Like for the Hippodrome is where they had the chariot races, and the Bull Drum is where they swore their Olympic oath so they wouldn't cheat. And the stadium, the Hill of Kronos is where they believe is where Zeus wrestled his father and started the Olympic Games. And the gymnasium in Palisadra was where they trained for combat sports and running. And the Temple of Zeus is where they make sacrifices before the games start. And then last, the Sacred Olive Tree is where they got their wreaths for the winner of the games.
I did my project over the Spartans, and the Spartans were really into their military. When boys were age 7, they were taken away from their families and put into training camps for the military. And at age 20, the boys would join the regular army. At age 30, they could return home at their families. And then age 60, they could retire. And then the government, they had to be over 60 years of age to be elected into the council. And then in the athletics, women were involved in wrestling, running, and throwing the javelin. Men did not participate in the athletics, and no other Greek city did that. They didn't really like women to be in athletics, and that's my project.
I did a film about Hammurabi. He's the guy who, even before the 10 Commandments, to write down a set of laws.
I did Egypt, and these are some of the main Egyptian structures that you can find. The Great Pyramids of Giza, and then the Great Pyramid is actually in the center, which is the biggest. And it was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and it is the only one that still stands today, because all the other ones have crumbled or have been washed away. And then the biggest one was built for Pharaoh Khufu, and then the medium-sized one was built for Khafre, and the smallest one was built for Menkaure. And then this is the Great Sphinx. And then with all the sandstorms, the sand builds up around its shoulders, and then several times the sand has had to be dug out. It had to be restored several times to try to preserve the Sphinx so it could last. And then it's very long. The paws right here are about twice the length of the back paws, and it's about 241 feet long, so it's very big, as you can see. And then it's supposed to have the face of Pharaoh Khufu, and then it has the body of a lion. So I thought that was very interesting that they could build that, and how big it is. And this is the Moses' obelisk, which is kind of like a tower that resembles what he did in his lifetime. And then there's hieroglyphics on each of the 4 sides. And originally he just put hieroglyphics in the middle, but then Ramses IV added hieroglyphics on both sides. And it's amazing that this obelisk is lasting, because it's been also chipped away by the sand and all the wind and stuff. So it's amazing it's still standing today.
Okay, Jesus was born to Mary and Joseph, and when he was a baby, 3 wise men brought him myrrh, frankincense, and gold. And then when he was about 2, King Herod heard that he would be born, and he didn't want him to be born because he didn't want anyone else to be king. So King Herod ordered to have everyone under 2 be killed, like all little boys. And so Joseph got a vision from an angel telling him that to bring Joseph, Mary, and baby Jesus to Israel so that they would be safe. And then when Jesus grew up, he taught God's word, and the Romans didn't like that much, so they wanted to kill him, so they crucified him on the cross by putting nails in his hands, feet, and hung him to the cross. And then after he was dead, they made a gash in his side to make sure he was dead, and then they put him in a big tomb and put a big boulder over it so no one could get in. And then after 3 days, Mary Magdalene and a different Mary came in to see if he was still there, and then the boulder was moved and the tomb was wide open and there was no one there. Then the angel appeared to them and told them that Jesus had risen from the dead. Then these are religions that spread from Jesus. This is a graph that shows the percentages of religions in the United States, with Christianity the biggest, Islam, and then atheists. And then when was Jesus crucified? Between 28 to 31 AD.
I did the Renaissance. There's 2 parts to it: Renaissance architecture and Michelangelo. Michelangelo was one of the 3 most famous artists of that time period. He was the second of 5 children in his family. When he was very young, he was sent off to a learning school, and the 3 years that he was there, he learned everything he needed to know about being an artist. Although he was very, very good in sciences, he passioned for art. He also did the architecture. One of his most famous statues was David. His most famous painting was the Sistine Chapel. He painted that.
My project is over the Punic Wars, which was a war between Rome and Carthage, because they were both trying to take over each other's land. So in the first war, which lasted just over 20 years, Carthage had a very strong navy, but it had no army, and Rome had a very strong army, but it had no navy. And for Rome to beat Carthage's navy, it had to quickly build its own. So it made over 100 warships in 2 months, which is very fast. After that war, Rome took over Carthage's sea trade routes, which had made Carthage rich. And then in the Second Punic War, a guy named Hannibal with 36 war elephants crossed the Appalachian Mountains in order to attack Carthage. He didn't get far. Most of his men and elephants had died after crossing the Alps. So he was defeated after only a few battles. And then in the Third War, Carthage was not allowed to have any army or navy because it had lost to Rome in the Second War. So it was completely burned to the ground, and they said that Rome even put salt on the crops there to not allow the crops to grow anymore, to keep Carthage from rebuilding itself.
My project is over ancient Roman fashion. Here is some stolas that they had, and the stolas usually had tunics under them, and the really short ones, like this one right here, that meant that they were slaves, or that they weren't rich, or that they weren't married. And then the long ones, like these, that meant that they were either married or they were rich. And they also had some hairstyles that were like up in buns and stuff, and there's some down here too. And they would have really complex hairstyles. It was really hard to do their hair. The most interesting thing that I learned was that they had to use spatulas pretty much for their makeup, and the thing about the short dress and the long stolas, and that they're called stolas, because most people don't know that. They think that they're called togas, not stolas.
Jesus was born in 551 BC. He married when he was 19 years old. He had 2 daughters and 1 son. His real name was like Kung Chai or something like that. These are some like books he wrote. He became a court official, and then like a couple years later, he traveled around China for 2 years. And then his thoughts have been into a system known as Confucianism, philosophy system. And he died when he was 78. And I think it was he died when he was 72 in 478 BC. And he was a really great man. He didn't. It wasn't really a religion. He just taught people how to be nice to each other and don't be greedy and stuff like that.
You were taught by your parents till you were 15. So you stayed at home. It was homeschooling. But even though you're homeschooled, the authorities have to be there to make sure that you're being taught what's right. And then when you were 15, you actually went to real school. And like, we were one of the first people to like girls actually go to school. So that's a big deal. Because most other countries only let boys go to school, but we actually let the girls go, so everyone got to go to school. So everyone got a good education, and that's why we're so high in intelligence. And I'm very proud of my people because they were so smart, and they grew a lot of vegetables and fruits from the floating gardens because they used what they have. They lived in the middle of an island in a lake, so they just swam out and just made this little island called the floating gardens, and that's where they kept all the fruit, and that's where they grew their vegetables and stuff. We kind of pretty much invented the taco. So without us, no Taco Bell.
And so what's it called? Pod?
Cacao.
Cacao.
Yes, we made chocolate. Yes, so no Snickers without us.
No, I know, really.
And we had a huge variety of fruit. We had from like the apple to the papaya. We had oranges, mangoes, guavas, watermelons, you name it, we have it. We were nomads, so we went to place, but our priest had a vision, and because he had this vision, he knew that this was the place that they were supposed to stay there. The cool thing is, it's like in the middle of a lake, so we ate a lot of fish. So that was a good that was one of our staples.
Well, in our first show this